And as soon as I get a few more, we will get started. Got kind of a mess on my table here because my kids were down here eating in my office before I cleared them out to get things set up. The jersey is, let's see if you can guess it, number 41 for the Miami Heat. If you can remember back to the 90s, this is probably, yep, Josh got it right. It's Glenn Rice. Justin got it right. It's Glenn Rice. Probably one of my favorite players, if not my all-time favorite player. I don't know why. I just really enjoyed watching him play. I think he's one that I kind of modeled my game after a little bit. Tried to model my game after a little bit anyway. But was one of my favorite players watching him play. If any of you don't know, he actually set the record and still has the record for most points in a quarter in an all-star game. Scored 24 points in one quarter of an all-star game. I believe it was back in the 90s, 97, if I'm not mistaken. So, played with the Lakers and won a championship during the Kobe and Shaq early days. And played for the Charlotte Hornets. That's actually the jersey that I would like, is the Charlotte Hornets jersey with him. But I do like the Heat jersey as well. All right. Starting to fill up, so we'll go ahead and get started here. I'll go ahead and bring my screen up. We talked last week about two subjects, and that's how we're going to go through this on a weekly basis. I'm going to move this over here by my ProShot logo so I don't cover up any words. But we talked last week and before I get into that, just remember, if you have any questions, at the end today, we're going to have our Q&A. And in our Q&A, you'll have a couple different ways that you can ask questions. You can go to towards the bottom of your display screen, your video display screen. There is a thing that says Q&A with a little speech bubble. If you click on that, you can type in your question, and that will allow you to type your question, and I can go through those in the order that they're in and address them one by one. The other thing you can do is on the bottom of your video panel, as well as if you open up the participants list, the attendees list, and you find your name and you go to the side of it and you hit options or more. I can't remember exactly what it says. You can also go in there and hit raise your hand, but it also should have an icon at the bottom of the video display that says raise your hand, and you can hit that. And when you hit that, if you want to come on during the Q&A and actually ask a question in person and use your camera and mic ability, you don't have to use your camera. You can just have your mic on, and I'll bring you in and you can ask your question and we can have a conversation back and forth a little bit. But that way, if you have a little bit more of a complex question, it's not something that's real simple and quick. If your question has some complexity to it or some layers to it, it's probably better for you to just raise your hand and I'll bring you in and we'll have a discussion that way. And if you type something in Q&A and I think it's kind of questionable as to what you're asking for, then I'll go find your link and bring you in and see if I can get you on the mic anyway. So that's for Q&A towards the end today. Look forward to hearing those. Last Sunday, as I said, we talked about philosophy as one of our first mistakes that you can make. And it was simply just going over simplifying the action or simplifying the information, and which was to me a mistake, and which to me was more productive. And we talked about just the philosophy behind what happens when you simplify the information versus what happens when you simplify the action. And I talked about how when you simplify the action, a lot of times you break down movements into simpler forms. And by doing that, it doesn't necessarily allow a shooter to complete the action that they want to complete. Shooting it's a very complex movement. It's a very complex skill, in that there's a lot of factors that go into it. There's a lot of different things that need to happen with the shooting action. And when you start simplifying the shooting actions, you're changing them in a way that may have a reaction of changing many other factors that we don't want to change. And you take other things out of the shot. Every action has an equal or opposite reaction, and kind of taking that into your mindfulness, and just understanding that if I do change something in the action, I may get positive results, but I also might get negative results from that as well. So we want to make sure that Wayne brought up last week, you said the key words you used in stressing the turn in the shot was shoulder to chin. Can you please clarify the process? I'll wait to get to those. They pop up as soon as you write them in here, but I'll wait to get to those a little later. If I can figure out how to get rid of it. There we go. That's kind of an example as well of simplifying the information. Was we don't necessarily want to, when we're coaching a player, we don't want to give them something that's going to change their action and make it simpler, as in you're cutting away certain movements, you're cutting away certain actions. We want to take the information and simplify the information. And a lot of times what happens is when you simplify the information, it gives a player freedom of movement, and it may even require a player to perform more movement than what they were doing when they were shooting before you made the change. So it's this whole philosophy behind not limiting players and allowing players to find their own solutions to problems. And sometimes when we limit players and don't let them find their own solution, you can actually be making a big mistake, in that you're not setting the player up for growth and for advancement, and allowing them to do what they feel is the best way for them to improve. So that was kind of our spiel on philosophy. Like I said, if you missed last week's talk, I know I had a few people reach out to me about the talk last week, and about when they could see replays of this. I will, at the end of the 5th webinar, part 5, I will start posting these webinars on YouTube and opening them up so you guys can go back in and view the webinars. If you don't want to wait, they are on our network. Here on this slide in the bottom left-hand corner, you see our online learning network. It's proshotsystem.mn.co. If you type that in, it'll bring you to a registration page. It's less than $10 a month, or less than $100 a year if you want to be a member. And I post these webinars. Last week's is already posted in there, and this one will get posted in there about 1 to 2 hours after we finish up tonight, because I record all these. So the second thing we talked about is cause versus effect, determining whether a visual flaw is actually the cause of that player missing, or if it's an effect of something else that goes wrong. And I gave the example of, when we walk outside and it's raining, we have to understand, is that rain, is that precipitation, is that a cause, or is that an effect? And often I kind of showed in some examples that often what we see is usually an effect of something else that is a cause. And I gave some non-shooting examples of that, as well as some shooting examples of that, to show just what I meant by that. That a lot of times when we see a flaw in a player's shot, I would say probably as much as 80 to 90% of the time that you see a player's elbow sticking out and they have this chicken wing looking thing on their shot, that is not the cause of them missing their shot. There's a reason why that elbow is out, and it's being caused by the grip. It's being caused by the shoulder position. It's being caused by a number of other different things that are not in the elbow. So you can't just say, well, straighten out your elbow and everything's going to be fine because they didn't address the cause. They're going to keep flaring their elbow out. So you have to go to the cause and fix the cause, not the effect. Okay, so those are the two things that we talked about last week. And this week we have two more additional things that I want to talk about that are some of the biggest mistakes made by shooters. My thing is there we go. Sometimes it wants to work, sometimes it doesn't. So this Sunday, we're going to talk about two other things. One is physics related, and one, again, is kind of a philosophy or a learning related. Okay, so this Sunday we're going to talk about physics, and we're going to talk about why so many point to strength, and we'll get into that. And then the second part we're going to talk about is running the race and what's the fastest way to lose the race. Sometimes you hear in basketball, coaches will say, well, we didn't lose this game. The other team won. And it's a bit of a play on words, which is what I'm doing here, which talks about, it wasn't the game really wasn't up to us. Well, it is. And so what I'm pointing at here is when we run the race, we're going to talk about how this is a marathon and not a sprint. When you're working on shooting, when you're trying to get better and better and better at shooting, we're going to talk about how it's a marathon and not a sprint. And you may want to stay tuned for that, because I guarantee you it's probably not going to be what you think it is. When I get into what I mean by it's a marathon, not a sprint. I don't mean that we need reps and reps and reps and reps and reps and it takes time. You should see almost immediate improvement when you do something that's right for a player. But we're going to get into that when we get to that. So let's go ahead and get started on the first one here. And the first one is our physics side, our physics thing that we want to address here. And this is something that I actually goofed up on. I made a mistake on over the past couple of years, but the mistake I made undervalued the way I look at this. It undervalued what actually happens here. And so how many times have you heard someone tell a player to move closer to the basket because they aren't strong enough to shoot from where they were shooting? Say you have like a 4th or 5th grader that's shooting a 3-point shot, and you can see them and that they're really working their body and moving their body and making big dramatic movements and trying to get as much power into that shot as they can. And you hear someone walk up to them and say, hey, you need to move in, you need to get a little closer, you're not strong enough to shoot from out there. That's what we want to look at here. We want to look at where the misconception is here, because I want to point out that strength is not our strength, and the way we view strength is not the problem here. Okay, because I have tons of young kids that are 4th, 5th, 6th graders, and even really small, I wouldn't call them strong at all, that are able to accurately shoot from 3-point range and not have any problem getting it there. One example is a kid named Corey Goodwin, who's out in Culver City, California. When he was in 4th grade, he was by far the best shooter on his team, and Corey was the shortest and littlest player on his team. And you would look at him, and if you were to line up the kids and go, okay, who's the strongest kid on this team, he would probably be the last one picked. But the kid was lights out from the 3-point line, just because of the certain techniques that he used to increase his accuracy and his range, and because he was using our system, and our system addresses that specifically. So my question to you is, have you heard this said to a player before? I'm sure we've all heard it. I've heard it hundreds, if not thousands of times. Not necessarily said to me, but said to other players, said to, even, and I've even been one to make a mistake to say, move in. And I don't say you're not strong enough. I just say that's not your range. It's not your range. You don't look comfortable shooting from there yet. So let's move in, work on our form. And then once we get our form, then you can move back. So how many times have you been the one to say this? Well, what we have to look at here is the physics behind this. The physics behind, we're going to call it speed versus strength, okay? And that's what we're looking at here. And I'll explain the mindset behind this. The most fundamental physics equation will show us our mistake. If you've ever looked into Newton's laws of motion and energy, you've come across this equation, and it's F equals ma. Okay, this is the equation for force. All right, F equals ma. When we look at F equals ma, there's something else that's an even bigger equation. That's the overview of what we're really looking at here, and that's P equals FV. Now, I got confused a couple years ago, and I actually messed up on this equation, and I was using P equals FA. Power equals force times acceleration, which is wrong. That's not the right equation. The right equation is power equals force times velocity. And it wasn't until I went back and did some review in my physics book. Yes, I have a physics book. It's sitting on my shelf right over here on my bookshelf. I have several of my textbooks from college, and I think I even have a few from high school over there. And I have a huge physics book that I reference quite regularly when I have a question about how something works, or when I go back and make sure that I have the right idea here. But we talk about power equals force times velocity, and this is where I want to kind of point to the fact that when we address a shooter, we don't really want to address strength. What we want to address is speed, okay? And the reason I point at that is because if we were to stand Dwight Howard or Shaquille O'Neal or DeAndre Jordan, one of those guys, right next to a Ray Allen or a Steph Curry or a JJ Redick, we would walk people up and we would say, who's stronger? Is Shaq stronger than JJ Redick, or is JJ Redick stronger than Shaq? Is Dwight Howard stronger than Steph Curry, or is Steph Curry stronger than Dwight Howard? Is Ray Allen stronger than DeAndre Jordan, or is DeAndre Jordan stronger than Ray Allen? And so that gives you a good idea of kind of the conception that we make when it comes to strength. We think of strong as like big, massive, forceful type people. And what we're looking at here is that it's funny. There's a guy out there that did a study on shooting, and what he started looking at with studies on shooting was that his math told him, the guy's name is Larry Silverberg, I believe. He's an astrodynamic engineer, I believe is what it's called, astrodynamic engineer, and he's at North Carolina State University. You can go look at some of the stuff that he wrote. You can find it if you Google his name and Google his articles. But he was looking for the optimal type of shot that would set you up for success at the free throw line. And he started talking about doing the math, and the math says that people who release higher than 7 feet, that actually the higher above 7 feet that you released, the better the shooter should be. Well, we all know that that's not true, because we go look at these NBA athletes and we see guys like Shaq and Dwight Howard and all these guys, and they're horrible free throw shooters. And they're the biggest, strongest athletes out there. They're the biggest, strongest individuals out there. And they struggle shooting from longer distances, okay? And you get guys like Steph Curry, who's one of the best free throw shooters of all time. And he's actually a better free throw shooter, a much better free throw shooter, let alone a much better three-point shooter than some of these bigger guys. And so we have to look at this, and it raises questions. Well, if strength is the key to me being able to shoot a basketball better from further away, then why aren't guys like Dwight Howard and Shaquille O'Neal and DeAndre Jordan and all these big, bulky, strong, massive centers and power forwards, why are they not the best shooters? And it's because it's not about strength. It's about speed. And Larry in his writing actually references this later. He talks about speed being one of the biggest, most critical parts of your shot. And if we just look at some of these equations, the force equals mass times acceleration and power equals force times velocity, we'll see that speed is by far the most important aspect that we want to look at when we're talking about shooting. This is why some of the best shooters are some of the smallest, weakest players that we can put on the court at times. And it's because of the speed aspect. They have the speed down. Steph Curry is not a great three-point shooter because he's big and strong. He's a great three-point shooter because he's so fast. And that allows him to create an advantage over other players that aren't typically as fast as he is when it comes to the velocity of the ball, the acceleration of the ball, being able to get everything moving, and taking that speed aspect and using it much more than he uses the strength aspect, okay? So P equals FV, power equals force times velocity. What is the value of speed in a player's shot? So we want to look at the speed versus strength, okay? And when we look at it, we see P equals FV. Well, you have P equals FV. V is velocity, which is speed. So you have speed one time right there in that equation, all right? And then we want to look at the deeper equation behind this, which is the fundamental equation of force equals mass times acceleration, all right? So we're digging deeper into, you have the velocity there as one variable, you have force there as another variable, and we're trying to make up this power because a player needs power in order to shoot the ball, all right? That power is generated by both force and by velocity, okay? Well, some of us will go, oh, force, that's strength. No, force is not strength, because if we look at what force is, force equals mass times acceleration. Acceleration is speed, okay? So force, when most people think of force, they think of mass. That's where strength is mass. Force is a little more complex than strength, okay? It's strength moved quickly is what force is, all right? And I know that we're sitting there going, well, that's not what I view it as. That's not what I view it as. Well, I'm talking about the general language among coaches, among trainers, among all this stuff. When they see a small player, they automatically think weaker. When they see a big player, they automatically think stronger. Does that make sense? So we associate strength with mass, okay? And there's where we make our first mistake, is if we take that approach and we associate that strength with mass, and we have acceleration right here. If you don't know, acceleration is meters per second squared, okay? So you're taking your meters per second, which is your velocity, and you're squaring it. You're timesing it by itself. So you have velocity as speed. So you have speed one time there in the P equals FV equation. And then when you dig deeper into the force, into the F, you get F equals mass times acceleration. Well, acceleration is speed or velocity squared. So you're getting speed times speed, speed squared. So the total amount of speed in this P equals FV equation is speed cubed. You're timesing speed by speed, you're squaring speed in the force, and then you're timesing it by speed again after you've multiplied it by mass when you get to the power equation to combine it with velocity. Okay, so we see speed 3 times there. My mistake was I went with this equation and I kind of messed up the equation by saying power equals force times acceleration. And I didn't look deeper into force. I just looked at the acceleration and I said, well, force is just a linear number and acceleration is a exponential number. So I was kind of missing out on the whole other realm of speed there, is that power is force times velocity. And so we get velocity there, we get our speed first, and then when we dig deeper into force, we're getting, you know, strength is that mass. That's a linear number. You know, you don't gain, you don't suddenly just gain 10 pounds. It happens over a period of time. So you increase your mass over a period of time, which is a linear growth, but you can increase speed over an exponential time. You can exponentially increase speed. Okay, so because you're dividing it by time, because you're squaring speed, timesing it by itself, speed is more of an exponential growth while mass is more of a linear growth. Okay, so when we look at this, we're getting power that while strength is linear, because we're looking at mass, because that's how most people view strength, is you just look at a player's mass and you look at their size and you right away judge their strength over what size they are. And you say, well, strength is a linear growth and speed is an exponential growth, because in acceleration, we're exponentially multiplying speed by itself. And then once we figure out the force, then we're multiplying it by velocity again to get speed is actually going to be cubed. Okay. We're going to use it 3 different times and we're going to multiply it 3 different times. So in this speed versus strength mistake that we can make sometimes, I always tell players, I tell them, you know, go home and if your parents don't believe that speed is more beneficial than strength, ask them if they have a 401k. And if they have a 401k, ask them, would they like their 401k to grow linearly, or would they like their 401k to grow exponentially? And then explain to them that strength is a linear growth and speed is an exponential growth, and that if they want their money to grow exponentially, then they may also want to look more at speed, because speed in this equation and how it's gathered for power and force, it grows exponentially. It's an exponential component of shooting, while strength is just a linear component, because strength is so dependent upon mass that strength really doesn't have the type of crucial pull like speed has. So that's our first look here, is that if we want players to be better shooters from further away, it's not about their strength, it's about their speed. It's about getting them to be able to use speed as a technique in their shot and be much more accurate and much more powerful in their shot. Okay, so I hope that makes sense. Moving on. Let's go to the second point here. Second biggest mistake. And I kind of phrase this as shooting is a marathon, not a sprint. But what I want to point out here is I'm not pointing to the obvious here. I'm not pointing to the obvious that, you know, it takes time to improve. You need to put up reps. That's true in a way. Improvement should happen pretty quickly. You should see results pretty quickly. If you're doing things right, you will see quick results. If you're teaching effectively and simplifying the information instead of simplifying the action, you will see very fast results. Okay? what some of you may be thinking and pointing to here is the repetition and the building of consistency and confidence, okay? And that's actually pointing to something that we're going to get into in one of our later webinars. So I'm not going to go down that path yet. What I am pointing to here is I'm referring to too much feedback. I see this all the time when I'll stand with parents or coaches and we've got a player right in front of us and they want to learn as much as they can. So they're asking question after question after question after question after question. They're telling their player, statement after statement after statement after statement, and they're just feeding. They're giving way too much feedback. And that points to overcoaching. They're trying to tell the player so many things in a short period of time that player experiences what I call feedback overload. And you start to see frustration. You start to see that player get frustrated. You start to see them get worse because their mind is trying to take in all this feedback and at the same time it's trying to perform these tasks, these complex actions of shooting. And so what we have to do here is we have to learn to teach effectively. And the most effective way that I've found to teach is to avoid overcoaching, to avoid giving too much feedback. And that is one reason why I like simple little 1, 2, or 3 word phrases. And you just repeat those phrases. You don't give statements to a player. Invite the player into a conversation, because we want the player to kind of start to figure things out for themselves, because that's what's going to set them up for success at a later time. Is if a player can take the information that's being given to them, okay, and they can sort it out and they can process it and it's not overwhelming them and they can easily separate it and wrap their brains around it and make sense of it, then they're getting a good amount of feedback and they're going to improve because of that. But when you see a player who's just getting statement after statement after statement thrown at them, they're being yelled at or they're being told in a very firm way to do this, not this, do this, not this, they start to get frustrated, visually frustrated. And I do this in my clinics. Anytime that I see a player that I'm working with get visibly frustrated, it's usually due to this feedback overload. They're getting way too much feedback, both from what they are seeing, what they're witnessing happen in their shot, and from me as their coach or from me as their trainer. So when you see that visible frustration, say something quick and encouraging to kind of get them back on a positive track and walk away. Let them be by themselves for a little bit, because kids are remarkable. Kids, especially some basketball players, kids are remarkable when you just give them a little bit of simple information and walk away and let them take what you've given them and play around with it a little bit. Be creative and don't hold them to any limitations. Just let them kind of think about what it is they're supposed to be doing and in figuring it out on their own. This kind of points to and I don't know if you've heard it said, you should have heard it said if you follow many coaching seminars or coaching clinics or anything like that, especially more modern day, is that the research shows over and over and over and over again that the better teams are player-led, not coach-led. That it's the players that are hungry. It's the players that want the success. It's the players that push the limits and increase the goals. It's the players that become leaders, and just the better ones pull the followers with them. The leaders pull the followers along with them. And it leads to this player-led learning. It leads to this player-led atmosphere. And you get so much more out of that as a coach. And as a coach, I've been in those atmospheres before, and it's fun. It is super fun to be around teams like that. It's super fun to be around players like that, where you can just give them information, throw them a little bit at a time, and they'll take that information and they will just run to the ends of the world with that information for you. And so that's why I take this approach. When you see that visible frustration on a player, they're getting this overload of feedback. Give them something positive to encourage them, like, hey, you got this. Hey, you're doing well. 2 shots ago, you did it exactly how I want you to do it. Think back to those 2 shots and remember how you did it then. And then, do that all over again and then leave. Just get away from them. Get away from them. Let them calm themselves. Let them get back to where they're only getting feedback from what they see and not from what they see and hear and feel, because you're getting so many different feedback mechanisms there where it may feel wrong, it may look wrong, you may hear your coach, hitting you with all these comments about what they see, and so they're hearing negative things, they're seeing negative things, they're feeling negative things. You need to get away from those players. If not even to just give them a few minutes to kind of collect themselves, calm themselves, and then be ready to jump back into a learning environment, because that's not a very good learning environment for them. The player should ultimately be the one who's responsible for sorting through the feedback. As coaches, I've heard the statement so many times over the past 10 years that I've been doing this, well, players aren't as good as shooting now because they just don't put the time in the gym that they used to. Players don't practice as much as they used to. Players don't, and so these coaches are standing back and they're almost giving excuses as to why their players aren't very good shooters. And they're on the right track. It is the player's responsibility, but it's the player's responsibility to sort through the feedback. It is not the player's responsibility to gather the information. You need to be the one that's giving them this simplified information. And what's funny about this is if you set this player into the right mindset where they're open-minded and they have this growth mindset rather than closed-minded and they want to shut everybody off, if you can get their mindset to be a more open growth mindset, when you throw out that simplified information to the player, they'll take that information and make the most out of it, as long as you're not limiting their actions, as long as you're not limiting what they can do with that information. Just give it to them and let them run with it. And the player is the one that's responsible. Once you've given them the information, they're the ones that's responsible for sorting through the feedback and figuring it out. And so that's kind of how I relate that. We want to create this player-led learning. We want to step away from giving way too much feedback. We want to step away from over-coaching, if you will. It's just let the player at times figure it out on their own, especially if you see them visibly frustrated. Just let them figure it out on their own. And I always try to make my sessions an interactive session, more so that it's not me training them. It's not me, giving them orders and preaching to them and saying, hey, let's do this. A lot of times I'll just start asking my players questions, because when you can ask questions that make a player's mind start churning and get those gears going on up there, and obviously don't ask them real deep stuff that's going to make smoke start coming out of their ears, but ask them a question that's maybe going to lead them down a path that you want them to go down and explore a little bit. Use questions in a way that it can provoke creativity in them. Use questions in a way that it can lead them down a different lane to improvement and get them going in the right way, where they're using the information that you give them correctly. Because we talked about it a little bit last week, and I'll add to it on this subject is when you give out, there's when it comes to shooting, there's both science and art involved. There's a science to shooting and there's an art to shooting. Okay. So you got to ask yourself, well, which one of those is my responsibility as a coach? Which one of those is the player's responsibility as the player? And when you step back, you have to understand that the science is the foundation. The science is the fundamentals. So if I, as a coach, just give players scientific Simple information. Just here's what the science says. This is the most efficient way to do it. See what you think about this. Try it. Let's try different versions of it. Let's not always be adamant to do it this one specific way. Just here's what I want you to accomplish. Here's the science behind it. Go. And so by giving the player just the science, you allow them to be creative where they can create their own art. And that's when shooting becomes this beautiful thing. You know, if we look at guys like Larry Bird and Reggie Miller and Ray Allen and Steve Nash and Steph Curry, if you had 5 guys on Mount Rushmore, those would be the 5 that I put up there. You know, those 5 would definitely be in the running. If you were to put 4 guys up on Mount Rushmore, those are the 5 guys you would have to argue about for the 4 spots up there, I believe, is, you know, those 5 guys, if you look at their shots, they all use the same fundamental techniques. They all turn, they all sway, they all dip, they all, you know, all the stuff that we've talked about. Most of them use the index finger. I'm pretty sure, not off the top of my head, I'm pretty sure all of them, they don't all use it the same way, but they all use the index finger release in a way that's best for them. And so when you look at those 5 guys, when you watch them shoot, their shots look different. They look very different in some ways. Reggie Miller's shot looks almost disgusting at first when you look at it and you don't understand it. But when you start dissecting their shots more and more and more, you see that all 5 of those guys, they all do the fundamental things that we talk about in the FOREST acronym that we have. They all do those fundamental things. They just do them in different ways. So they work with the science, but they make the science an art of their own. So that's the important thing here that I want to get across, is that if we're just communicating the science to our players and keeping it as simple as possible and letting the players develop their own art to the information that we give them that's about the science, then that's when a lot of times, for the most amount of players, you're going to see a lot of improvement. There are going to be some of those players that they're zebras. Coach Jarvis, Coach Mike Jarvis, that coached at St. John's and took St. John's to the NCAA tournament a few times. And we were down with him, I believe it was 2015. We were down with him at Florida Atlantic, and he had a little spiel that he talked about about his players to myself and Coach Hoover when we were down there. And he said, you know, you got to, as a coach, you got to figure out who your lions are, and you got to figure out who your zebras are. The lions are the leaders. Every other player that you have is going to follow those lions. So you got to figure out who your lions are, and those are going to be the guys that you mentor. Those are going to be the guys that you don't give them orders. You don't give them statements. You just ask them questions. You kind of mentor them. You kind of like challenge them from time to time, because they'll lead and all the zebras will come scurrying behind them and following them. So you just got to figure out who your lions are so that your zebras can start following. You're going to have a zebra or two that are just so developmentally incapable of doing things on their own that you might have to every now and then give them a little nudge, give them a little push to keep them up with the rest of the flock. But from a standpoint, you know, our job as coaches is to address the team and to move the team along, as no one individual is more important than the team. So you move the team along, and then the stragglers, you kind of just tell your assistants to put a boot up their butt and get them moving behind them. So you're going to have a few of those zebras, a few of those players on each team that may need a little bit of nudging, that may need a little bit of further work, and that you got to give more detail to. But for the most part, keep your message simple. Don't overcoach. Don't give them more information than they should need, than other than just here's what we want to do. This is why we want to do it. Here's typically how you do it. Go have fun. Go figure it out. You know, give them the science and then let them develop the art on their own, and make sure that their art fits the science. That's the only thing you got to do from a feedback standpoint as a coach, is just make sure what they're doing artistically fits the science behind what you've given them the information on. Okay. So to our Q&A now. Let me take down my screen here. I hope that helps you guys. Those were the two things that I wanted to kind of touch on and go over. So you guys now can go to your Q&A, or you can go to your raise your hand and ask any questions that you want to ask. The couple that are up here, Wayne asked a question earlier on last week. You said the key words you used in stressing the turn in the shot was shoulder to chin. Shoulder to chin. Can you please clarify that process? Okay, so this is kind of getting back to that simplify the information, not the action. The only thing that I tell them for shoulder to chin, and shoulder to chin is both a turn and a sway command. It's a phrase that I use to teach both the turn and the sway. And all it is from a player's standpoint. Now there are other aspects to this. There are other aspects as far as where the chin should be. The chin should be up. The chin should not be down. On bad shooters, a lot of times the bad shooters typically have their chin down. Good shooters have their chin up. So we want the chin up. Then all I tell them is hey, when you shoot, if I see problems with their accuracy, a lot of times you'll see players who are shooting like this. You can see my shoulder's over here. My chin's over here. Okay? So my command to them is get your shoulder to your chin. And for them to do that, they have to bring their shoulders around and rotate and get that shoulder to get out in front of their chin so that when they shoot, they're here. And then obviously here, if you've heard of us talk about the one-eye shooter, you can see one eye. I've got my shoulder right in front of my chin, so my arm and my release are aligned straight vertically, and they're going through my right eye over here. My left eye can see through that and past that, and I've opened a little window for my left eye to see the basket. So that's kind of, you can see how I relate the one-eye shooter, the shoulder to chin, the sway, the turn. It brings all those things together. And I simplified the information because all I did was I just gave them this one command of, hey, make sure when you shoot, go shoulder to chin. Put your shoulder in front of your chin when you shoot. And I may give like one or two demonstrations to them to show them what I mean by that, just by, give them a front view where they're here and they see that everything's out in front, and then give them a side view where they're here and everything's out in front, and they can see that that chin's not touching the shoulder, that it's just getting the shoulder out there in front of the chin. So I would simplify the information in that way. That's kind of the process that I give on that, and I'm getting ready to open that up in our network, our online learning network. I create courses, and each one of those courses corresponds to a different technique, and we're gonna start talking about those sort of things, because I'm getting to the point where over the next couple of weeks I'm going to wrap up all the information on the forest and get all that stuff out there, specific teaching points, specific phrases that I use, all that kind of stuff. But I encourage people to come up with their own phrases, encourage them to, help the player learn to lead in this learning process. Like we talked about, tell the player, hey, what we want to do is bring that shoulder to chin, but at the same time say, hey, what do you think about when you think of shoulder to chin? And see if they can come up with a little phrase on their own that helps them process that information a little better than maybe what we can give that information to them for. Okay, so that's what I mean by that process of getting shoulder to chin. It's a big one for the turn. It's a huge one for the sway, because the sway is actually in the shoulders. It's not in the feet. The feet are in effect the cause of the shoulders. And hopefully, I was having a discussion with Coach Steve Moore on here at the beginning of this, and he was asking me about, when gyms were under this lockdown and quarantine and everything. I think it's going to be a pretty distinct state by state when things are opening back up. This is my full-time job. I'm not sure what kind of year I'm going to have with all these lockdowns going on and all these gyms that are shut down and closed. I'm not sure how many camps I'm going to be doing, because right now, April, May, June, July, and August, those months are my biggest months. Those months are the months that I make the vast majority of the money I use to feed my family and myself, which obviously that I need quite a bit. those are the months that I really pull in a lot of the money on camps and clinics. So this year, I'm just trying to take it day by day and figure it out with scheduling those. So it's getting the shoulder around in front of the chin. That's the goal there. Simplifying the information to let them know, hey, this is what you're trying to do. Go play with it. Go figure out, how to be creative on your own with that, and get it done. And then just make sure that whatever they choose to do, their art fits the science behind it. So on that live network, if you guys join that, you'll see more of what I'm talking about on there. There'll be videos on there that I don't put out on YouTube or anything like that. They're going to be specific to just that network. So hope that answers it, Wayne. If not, just raise your hand and I'll bring you in and we can talk more on that. Mike asks, would you say speed makes the shooter more accurate, powerful, and fluid? Yes, absolutely. I think that speed is what helps bring everything together. When I set up this, when I went beyond the forest and decided we need to go beyond just the fundamental shooting techniques here that we teach, we need to go beyond that and start looking at more of just the transition. I call them transitional techniques, which are the techniques that add to the fundamentals and go a little bit more in depth and a little bit further with the information and the checkpoints that we're using with the fundamentals. And so when I created that ART acronym, that accuracy and then range and then transitions acronym, the transitions is really what starts to pull everything together. So if you're going to fix left and right misses, you need all the accuracy techniques. If you're going to fix short and long misses, you're going to need all the range techniques. And if you start looking at transitions doesn't really help with any specific directions. It kind of helps with all directions, because what we're doing is we're taking all of the basic stuff in accuracy and range, and we're finding all these little techniques that you can use to combine the accuracy and the range and bring all these techniques together. And I call it transitional, because when you go from one action or one movement to the next action or movement, you have to have a good transition there. You have to have a good transition between one movement and the finishing movement. So the beginning movement, the pre-shot movement, or the present shot movement, and the post-shot movement, you have to have things that tie all these movements together. And transitions, the techniques that we have in transitions, are what ties all those things together. And so when you start getting all those transitional techniques down, it really emphasizes the accuracy, the power, the fluidity, how smooth a player's shot looks. Because I'm sure we've gone out and we've seen players that are very rigid in their movements. They look stiff, they look uncomfortable. Their movements are very spazzy. There's not good transitions between them. And it's really hard for those types of players to be good shooters, because there's so many different things that are separating their actions, that they need things that are going to pull all those actions together. And so speed, being able to get the ball moving, accelerate the ball, and then increase the ball's acceleration and velocity through the shot, all the way from the beginning when the ball first hits your hands, getting it moving, getting that momentum and inertia that's related to speed, getting that momentum and that inertia on the ball with the dip, getting the ball accelerated, getting good velocity on the ball into your shot. If you're a one motion shooter, speed's going to be your biggest benefit. If you're a two motion shooter, that means I'm taking a little bit of speed away, because as a two motion shooter, I start my shot and then I pause my shot and then I go back into my shot again. So I'm losing a lot of momentum there. I'm losing a lot of that inertia that I've created initially on the ball. And so that's some of the stuff that we're going to start getting into in the network in a week or two, is these things that, we're going to start getting away from things that you see a lot of the professionals do, because the professionals have the strength to do certain things. Some of these guys in the NBA are freaks of nature. Some of these guys, even in college, are freaks of nature. And so when you're that big and that strong and that I don't even want it that fast, you can start to break a few rules and still have enough to complete the action and be successful from time to time. So saying that speed is a specific technique in range, and it's also a specific technique in our transitions section of our art. So, and I address certain parts of speed and certain phases of speed in those techniques when we look at the art on the learning network, and when we want to focus on speed in the pre-shot, when we want to focus on speed in the present shot, when we want to focus on speed in the post-shot phase. So I hope that helps. I would say absolutely yes, Mike. Speed does. It's a huge factor, and probably the greatest factor, the most critical factor in a player's ability to shoot from further away from the basket and still maintain accuracy, still gain power, and be able to produce the power that they need to get it to the basket and get rid of those short shots and get rid of those right and left shots. So fluidity is a huge thing there, especially with speed. I always tell them, I want you to push your speed. I want you to push how fast you go, but I want you to make sure that you're quick. You're not in a hurry. And the way I separate those two is quickness is moving quickly through a motion, but you're still under control. Being in a hurry, you're moving quickly through a motion, and you're moving so quickly through a motion that you're starting to lose control. So we have to learn to develop speed while still being in control of that speed. So that's one of the tricks that we go over in that technique, is how to increase our speed but still be in control of what's going on with the ball. So Josh said, when shooting, I know that you should jump forward. Correction, you should not jump forward. You should sweep forward. The sway should cause your feet to kind of glide forward. You're jumping, and you're jumping in the same spot. Your feet are landing ahead of you. You're not physically jumping forward with your whole body. That's a misconception that people have developed about the sway. The sway is not a forward jump. It is a forward land. Listen specifically to the words that I'm using there, because that's going to give you the biggest separation in what those two mean. A forward jump means my entire body is coming forward. A forward land means just my feet and legs are coming forward. So in the sway, we don't jump forward, we land forward with just our feet and legs. Our upper body, our shoulders are still in the exact same spot they were when we left the ground from the shot. So when doing this, you should also lean back a little. No, because that's called a fadeaway. Josh, the key here is, and I hope this helps, the key here is on the sway. If you focus on the feet and jumping forward and landing forward, you're going to kick your feet out in front of you, and you're going to be off balance. That is not what we want at all. Coach Hoover did a very poor job in expressing what exactly we wanted with the sway on this. The sway is not a foot technique. It's not a lower body technique. It is a shoulder technique, okay? So let me explain this. The turn and the sway are very interrelated. They're different, but they're very interrelated. The turn is just me getting one shoulder closer to the basket than my non-shooting shoulder. So the turn is just me getting my shooting shoulder toward the basket, non-shooting shoulder a little back away from the basket. Just get it out of the way. The sway is, and I've flirted with this idea of changing the technique that we label as sway. I've flirted with this idea, but I think it would be bad in that we've already gotten so many people familiar with the word sway that I haven't actually taken action and changed this yet. I think a better word that describes the motion for sway is slope. S-L-O-P-E. Slope. You probably learned about this in your algebra or trigonometry classes in math. Slope. Slope is just this change in height, change in level, okay, over distance. So what it is the turn is getting the shooting shoulder forward And a result of that is letting the non-shooting shoulder move back a little bit. Sway is getting the shooting shoulder up and the non-shooting shoulder letting it stay down, and that is slope. My shoulders are going to be sloped. So if you look, if I turn this way, if you look at the difference between my non-shooting shoulder and my shooting shoulder, I go here. And you can see how shooting shoulder's up here, non-shooting shoulder down here. You can see that slope. It's angled, okay? From my front shoulder goes up, my non-shooting shoulder stays down. So slope is a little better word to describe what the sway is than the word sway itself. So many people have a misconception, and I blame Coach Hoover, but I don't give him all the blame. I also like to put a little bit of blame on Coach Nick from B-Ball Breakdown, who interpreted it incorrectly. I like to put a lot of blame on Coach Colin from Shot Mechanics, who talks about the feet over and over and over again after I've told him time after time after time, stop talking about the feet. Stop talking about the feet. It's not about the feet. Last week we talked about cause and effect. The feet are an effect. The shoulders are the cause. So if you address the feet, you're addressing an effect, and it's not going to make you feel comfortable in what you're doing, okay? If you address the shoulders, you're addressing the cause, and that's going to allow you comfort, okay? So address the cause allows comfort. Addressing the effect allows, who knows, radical movements, all right? It's effect is an error, cause is comfort, okay? That's a good way to think about it when you address the different components like that. So that's what sway is. Sway is really just the slope of the shoulders. A good one to watch is go back and watch some film of you can watch Kevin Durant. Kevin Durant has a good shoulder slope in his sway. J.R. Smith has a good shoulder slope in his sway. Those are two guys that have a lot of sway because they have a lot of shoulder slope, and they jump pretty high on their shot. They jump quickly as well. Players that don't jump real high, it's a lot harder for you to see the effects of the sway because the higher you jump, the more you sway, because you're in the air longer, which allows that shoulder slope to take effect and let the feet come further forward. So I hope that kind of helps make a little bit of sense out of the sway. It's not jumping forward, it's sloping the shoulders so that you can allow your feet to land forward rather than jump forward, okay? So I hope that helps, Josh. Michelle, I believe. When considering hand size to ball size, particularly for 11 through 15-year-olds, would you have the grip still with the index finger down from the valve, or to have the valve between index and middle finger and progress as they grow? So I will make an admission here. The bigger a player's hands are, the better the index finger release works, because the bigger your hands are, the more force, the more strength you can emit on the ball through the motion, okay? With the younger players, I still teach them the index finger, not the V. I teach them the index finger straight alignment, not the V, because the V is like anytime you go the V, splitting the valve, versus index finger on the valve, you're changing the science behind what you're teaching. And the science behind what you're teaching is if you're dominating with one finger, it allows you to control one direct force into that ball. Now, I know the other fingers are holding the ball and going through, okay, but you're dominating your force with just one finger, versus if you split the valve, you're dominating your force preferably equally between these two fingers. And we both know that if you wanted to create equal force between two different things, there's a lot of inconsistency there when you're trying to exert equal force through two different actions, okay? So I still have a ton of success when I teach my younger kids to put the index finger in the middle, but as they grow and as their hands get bigger, they are going to see better and better results from just bigger hands on the ball and better control and better grip. I typically, what I do is I have them try different grips as far as their offhand. Not necessarily, I don't mess with the grip so much on the shooting hand. I like to mess with the grip a little bit on the offhand if they feel like they're having an uncomfortable grip on the ball, and that they think the index finger is, because the index finger, the science behind it is uncomparable to other things. And I got in a debate on YouTube with a guy who says that all these players who say they're index finger shooters are actually middle finger shooters. And I just went through his entire argument and showed where all of his fallacies lie, and tried to talk to him, and show him where all these mistakes that he's making in his thing are. And he basically just, I said, give me proof that I'm wrong. And as usual, he can't really give me any proof. He just, his ways that the paths that he tried to go down when he was trying to debate my argument were completely irrelevant to what it is that I was talking about. So I knew that one of two things was wrong. He either had a different definition of terminology than I was using, or he didn't understand what I was saying. So one of those two things had to be the reason why he couldn't figure out, where the fallacies were in his arguments and where the mistakes he was making in logic were. So offhand gripping techniques. I got a basketball over here. Let me grab the basketball real quick. So I thought I had a Pro Shot ball over there that had our logo in the middle, but I think I took it outside for instruction the other day. So let's just use the NBA D-League logo here. If I place my index finger, on that logo right in the middle, that would be in the center, okay? Or you say the valve. I could come around to the valve right here. I can place my index finger here. Here's what we're trying to get from this. And this is the science behind the shooting hand, and then I'll go to the offhand. So the science behind the shooting hand is I want that index finger in the middle so that I'm pushing through the middle of the ball to get the ball to go through the middle of the rim with the index finger. Okay, so if I put my index finger in the middle of the ball and then keep my index finger aligned with the middle of the rim all the way through my shot, the ball is going to be mostly influenced to stay straight in that line from the middle of the ball to the middle of the rim. Okay, so that's the science behind the actual shooting hand. With the offhand, you have an option, and because if we have smaller shooting hands, obviously we're going to start to lose a little bit of grip. If you start to lose a little bit of grip, having the offhand, let me move this chair and stand up and do it that way. It'll give you guys a better angle. So if I just put my hand on the valve to make this simple. If I'm compact, this is a compact grip. You can see how far back my offhand is. It's back here by my shooting hand, and they're kind of back here together. So I have bigger hands. So people with bigger hands can do this kind of compact grip because the hands are closer together, and because my fingers are longer and my hands are bigger, I still have good control and good grip on the ball because my hands are bigger. So what typically happens with younger kids, and this is what I see them do, is they'll start to move this hand maybe out like this in front. And actually I've filmed myself before shooting, and when I film myself, I've seen myself actually have my hand sometimes out here like this in front, and then I shoot, and what I do is I just pop this hand like this. Right before I shoot, right before I let go, I just go pop like that and pop the hand up, the offhand up, right before I push through and shoot, okay? And so that's one thing that you can change on the offhand. We're going to talk about on our learning network, we're going to talk about, especially as we go into grip, this idea of, a player set here where they got the ball out in front of them, they got the index finger on the valve in the middle, and the index finger is kind of pointing there, but this may be uncomfortable. So it's kind of almost like rotating. I want the ball in front of my shooting shoulder and shooting hip. So it's almost like instead of doing this, I have a little bit of ball rotation like this, where I have this hand on the side of the ball, this hand on the side of the ball, and then as I go to shoot, you can see how I almost am having one point, whether it's middle finger, index finger, I'm rotating the ball because I'm on the side down here. I'm rotating the ball like this in my hand, and I'm getting a little softer grip with my offhand. So as I come up into my shot, if I start here and have a better grip to start, then all I do is I rise into my shot as I just see how my grip is looser with this hand, and I can just rotate that ball like that as I start to come up. And I keep my grip with my shooting hand, but I loosen my grip a little bit with my offhand. So does that kind of help? Does that kind of make sense in what you were asking? If not, raise your hand and I'll pull you in and maybe we can discuss it in there instead. If I can find it here. Q&A one. Okay, good. So I allow players to kind of sometimes figure it out on their own, Michelle, and allow them to create their own tendencies first, see what they're capable of doing on their own. And then if something that they're doing crosses the line, if it goes too far, or if it goes back into the realm of, oh, we don't want to do this, then you can say, hey, don't just say, hey, don't do that. That's bad. Take the approach of, hey, I see what you did there, but that's kind of getting away from what we want to do. So let's find a different way, maybe that you're comfortable completing this action, and see if that helps. And kind of just don't stop them and turn them around and have them do a 180 on the path back to where they were and then take a different route. Just kind of take their path and just kind of go off road a little bit and try to veer over into another lane. And the players are they're gonna like that a lot better, because it's not abruptly. We have to keep in mind that a player's jump shot is very personal to them. So anytime that we try to change something, they've got to be the ones that are willing to change. They've got to be willing to change before we change them. And sometimes a little having a discussion about that, and maybe even saying, hey, let's have you ever thought about this, and presenting something to them, and let them kind of wrap their brains around that new idea that you present to them, or giving them a scientific reason behind why they would want to do one thing rather than the other, can help them kind of convince themselves to maybe change something. So I just, every time I talk about a player making a change, I always go back to there's actually a recruiting pamphlet that I saw one time for a college, and it said, people believe about 5% of what you tell them. People believe about 20% of what you show them. People believe about 50% of what their friends and family tell them. And people believe 100% of what they tell themselves. So the trick is to maybe ask questions to a player, or create a conversation with a player that gets them to point themselves towards the solution, rather than you just give them the solution and let them go with it. So I like to do a lot of stuff like that as well with my players. And I think that's why I see a lot of success with the players I work with, is because I just don't give them answers. I want them to figure things out on their own, because there's a much more deeper sense of self-satisfaction in a player getting success from those types of strategies when it comes to learning. So, see here, I'm looking, no hands are raised. Any other questions? Any other questions you guys would like me to address? Anything from today that maybe you weren't clear on? If not, we've gone for about an hour and 15. There's Steve. I'll bring him in. Promote. And I will go to, there he is. Okay, Steve, go ahead.
Hey, Matt, I've got a kid, he's a senior. He's got a hitch in his shot.
Yep.
It's going to be the spring and the summer when we're really going to really work on his shot. He's a great finisher at the rim. I mean, he finishes left to right. He shot 10% from the three-point line until I took away his three-point shooting. He's not a bad pull-up jump shot.
Yeah.
But we got a very limited amount of time. If there's one thing that you would kind of, because I'm only going to have him, Lord knows what's going to happen here in Ohio in terms of how much instructional time I'm going to have before our season starts. Is there anything, what would you focus on? Or if there's, I know you say the finger, turn, and eyes are kind of the progression.
So what year is he in high school?
He's going to be a senior.
Going to be a senior.
I've only got him for, limited amount of time in terms of once our season starts. And
yeah. The first question I would ask him is, do you want to make a change? Do you want to find a way to be more efficient?
Yeah, and he will.
At his shot. And if he says yes, I would look into maybe what's causing him to have that hitch in the first place. And the biggest thing I would look at is Steve's in the online network, so he'll be able to access this, is we're going to start talking about one motion and how to attain a one motion shot. And I would start training him to be more of a one motion shooter. You're probably, with him going into his senior year, even if he agrees to change, he's probably not going to get all of the pause out of his shot, but he can get enough of it out of his shot to become a much more consistent shooter. And some of the things that we'll talk about with one motion is just trying to keep the ball moving. Does he come, like you say he has a hitch, does he come offline, or does he come
too far back
like a catapult?
Yep, a catapult.
Back like a catapult. So what I would say has happened there is, number one, he's probably been taught to start the ball really high on his shot. Number two, I would say he's probably been taught not to dip, even though he might before. He's probably been taught not to dip, and so he's created this habit. And he's also probably got this, I call him a mental block or a mental barrier, where these players, when they're young, they think they need so much force that they focus a lot on strength and throwing the ball rather than just speed and guiding the ball. Does that make sense?
Yep.
So I wouldn't really, a hitch can cause left and right misses because you're disrupting the motion of the ball, right, and then restarting. And if you're back here in a hitch, you can't see what direction you're restarting the ball in. Yeah. Does that make sense? Yep. So that's what's going to throw off the accuracy. And that's where a hitch can lead to inaccuracy in a shot. And so what I would say you want to look at is start with maybe the dip, and seeing if the dip, and teaching him to combine the dip and the one motion into a shot will help him stop coming back here. Does that make sense?
Yep.
And just also, here's another one. There's a technique that we're going to talk about in our transitions section of art, and it's called proximity. Okay? The number one reason why players have a two-motion shot or a heavy two-motion shot with a hitch is because when they go to shoot, oftentimes they're holding a ball here. Their first movement is here, not here. Does that make sense?
Yes.
The second you go here and start to bring the ball away from your body, you are losing power, so you have to come back to your body and over your head to get that power back so that you can get enough on your shot to get it to the basket. Okay. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
So when I start talking about that proximity technique that we have in transitions, you'll hear me talk about, is the player's first movement with the ball out, or is the player's first movement with the ball up? And we want to create the proximity of the ball is having the ball proximal to my body. So keeping the ball tight and close to the body. the closer that ball is to my center of gravity, the more strength and power I'm going to be able to create as a shooter. And when I have the ball that close, it's hard for me to come up and go back over my head. That's a hard movement to do because I've already got the strength and motion and everything that I need. So when I get to about my shoulder to eye level, I can just, boom, I can go out from there. So those are the things that I would start working on him with, is getting those three things: dip, one motion, and proximity. Combining all those together and start teaching those things to help him get a better one motion shot and get that hitch out of his shot.
Okay, thank you. That's good.
Yep. Anything else? Anybody else have there's Jake raising his hand. Oh, his hand went down. Jake, did you have a question? Jake, I'll just hit allow to talk here and see if you had something. So Steve asked up or out, but you dip first. So the dip is I would catch, I would bring it down to my low set position. And then the first thing I want to do from that low set position, Steve, is I want to go up, not out. Okay, I hope that helps. I want to catch, I want to bring to my dip position, and I want to go up, not out. Because when I go out, then I have to bring the ball back to my center of gravity. So I always ask a player, is your first motion up or is your first motion out? And they'll think about it for a few seconds, and they'll turn to me and go, oh, I go out. And then I say, yeah, we want to go up. We want to keep that ball proximal to our center of gravity, proximal to our body, and keep it close so that we are able to create more and more power on our shot. So Bob asked, with young players, is there a point of emphasis that should be worked on first? Accuracy, always accuracy. Accuracy is the most important. Accuracy is the most important part of a player's shots. That's the reason why I ordered it as ART. With young players, you want to focus on accuracy, accuracy, accuracy. Get their left and right misses below 10%. And get them as low as you can possibly get them. And when you do that with your younger players, you're setting them up that once they then get accurate, they can keep working on that accuracy and being straight, and then they're much more set up for success as they start to grow in their adolescence. Between the ages of like 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, when they're making their big growth spurts during those ages, you're going to see them make huge gains in range then. So I don't really work with a player on range or transitions until they are accurate first. And I'll keep them, just depending on their age, I'll keep them in close. My son is a 7-year-old. He's in first grade right now. And when he goes out and shoots, I keep him inside of about 8 feet. I don't let him shoot any further than about 8 feet out, just because I want him to focus on that accuracy thing first. And accuracy, the further you become from a target, the smaller target you're shooting at. So if you can't shoot accurately from 8 feet away, you're not going to be able to shoot accurately from 12 feet away, let alone 20. So I always emphasize accuracy first. Then after we get good accuracy with a player, we then go to range. And then once they start to get accurate and good range, then we want to go to transitions last to kind of link all of our techniques together and make sure that we're creating smooth, fluid, transitional movements from the very beginning of the shot to the very end of the shot, and making sure that the whole action looks like one quick reflex rather than 100 different movements all separated into different movements. We want it to look like one movement, but there's really probably 100+ different actions that are occurring there. So hope that answers your question, Bob. But yeah, young players, I always work on accuracy first. So finger, turn, offhand, grip, having their chin up, stuff like that. That's going to give them a good start point for their success. So, okay, anything else? Last call here for questions in the Q&A, and last call for hand raises. Jake said he hit the wrong button. That's okay. Okay. I don't see anything else popping up in Q&A, and no hands raised. So we go ahead and end this. Like I said, email for part 3 for next week. We got 2 more things to talk about. So email for part 3 will go out tomorrow morning. So make sure you watch for that. They usually go out at 10 a.m. Eastern time. So whatever time that correlates to you where you're at, whether you're on Central Mountain or Pacific or even somewhere else around the world. I know we've had some other guys from Australia and Europe and places like that have joined into these as well. Eastern time is, I think it's GMT -4. So Central's 1 hour behind us, Mountain's 2 hours behind us, Pacific is 3 hours behind us. So you can make your calculations according to that. But I usually send out those emails at 10 a.m. On our constant contact email list. And so you guys will be able to register for that as soon as it goes out at 10 a.m. tomorrow morning for part 3. 2 more things that we want to talk about. And then we'll also have a part 4 and part 5. Our last webinar will be, I believe it's Sunday, the 24th of May. So that is the day before Labor Day. Not Labor Day, sorry. The day before Memorial Day will be our last one. So, all right, I will let you guys go this evening. If you have anything else, feel free to email me or write it down. And when you guys get registered for the next webinar, you guys are more than welcome to ask the question in there. All right. Thanks a lot, guys. Stay safe, and we'll see you soon.